paid up for their sneakers or their coats, their bombers.
Zatiti Moody was a student at Eastside when a principal named Joe Clark became a symbol of a tough new approach to discipline.
Walking the hallways without a pass, that means suspension.
The school is in despair and there's kind of hopelessness all around you, but he was fighting for our right to have an education free from interference.
I'm gonna carry this back, and any drug pusher I see trying to enter into those 35 doors, I'm gonna beat the hell out of them.
But Clark also did something even more controversial to get the school under control.
He forced out 300 students because, as he saw it, they were the hardcore troublemakers.
He had the kids in the auditorium, and he said, "You are undercredited, you are overaged, you will never graduate from this high school." And he had the guard walk him to the door.
There are some people you are not going to save. They are incorrigible.
Removing those students, that was a bold approach to education. He became a national icon.
Clark is one of the best-known school principals in America, the Rambo of public education.
And a movie based on Clark made the power of strict discipline part of popular culture. By the time Lean on Me came out, Clark had clashed with the school board over his tactics, but tough discipline was spreading to other schools as reports of gun violence were starting to rise.
Last year alone, there were 35 violent deaths in schools. One student shot and killed another in a hallway.
Kids killing or being killed has emerged as a potential national crisis. We're not talking about kids who are doing routine kinds of bad things in school. These were kids with guns who were murdering other kids. There was a real concern that we were just losing control as a society.
We've got to be tough, and we have to take those young people who are in essence predators, even at a young age, and separate them from the rest of society.
By the mid-90s, when Eric Holder was Deputy Attorney General, getting tough in schools had already become national policy. The federal government mandated immediate expulsion for anyone who brought a gun to school. The policy came to be known by a single phrase:
Zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance for guns and drugs in schools.
People were looking for ways to put up rings around schools to reduce the possibility that violent crimes could occur.
Then in 1999, a mass shooting captured national attention.
It's happened again. A mass shooting at an American school, Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado.
It has been a horror.
Columbine added fuel to the push for more school security.
Parents across the country are demanding to know what their schools are doing to keep their children safe.
The federal government devoted hundreds of millions of dollars to adding more police in schools.
There was the need in some neighborhoods for a police officer presence to be there. The hope was to make schools safer, to make our nation safer.
10 years later, Eric Holder came back to government, this time as Attorney General. He began to look into the impact of zero-tolerance policies. It turned out school violence had already started to fall before the policies were fully implemented. But the effect of zero tolerance on students was startling.
Some of the numbers that were presented to me, I actually thought had to be wrong.
For years, schools had been suspending more than 3 million students a year, and it wasn't just for guns.
7-year-old Lamont Agnew was kicked out of the 2nd grade for 45 days for bringing toenail clippers to class.
And with more police in schools, the police were handling more discipline problems and arresting tens of thousands of students. Investigations would find that in some schools, the most common charge was disorderly conduct, like kicking a trash can.
Things that were routine infractions when I was growing up and might have landed you in the principal's office, you ended up in a police precinct. I don't remember one kid in the time that I was in the public schools in New York City who ever got arrested.
And Holder saw something even more troubling in the data.
Black kids are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. They are much more likely to be treated harshly for the same conduct. If you are suspended or expelled, you're much more likely to drop out. If you drop out, you are much more likely to become involved in the criminal justice systems. And this has a huge, huge impact on the lives of young people.
Zero tolerance changed Jeremy Hudson's life when he was He says one day before school, he helped.
This was not something that was happening, as Eric Holder said, when he was a young man. In the 1970s, less than 4% of students were being suspended, which is still pretty high considering how destructive it is, but it's nothing like what's going on now. And then we had the crack cocaine epidemic. This is way before your time. But I remember the kind of startling headlines and the focus. This epidemic really hit inner cities because the pricing, different kinds of cocaine in different locations, and there was a big crime spike, and a lot of harsh punishments were imposed. There was also a real growing concern about crime and violence in schools, and so states and districts adopted policies that required suspension, automatic suspension. This is the no-zero policy. And then there was the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act, which mandated a year-long out-of-school suspension if you brought a weapon to school. And as you heard, that got interpreted very loosely, right? So what did the 7-year-old bring? Toenail clippers, right. Terrifying. And school districts adopted their own policies on this broken windows theory of policing, which Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, was making famous in terms of crime, trying to reduce crime in New York.
We actually talked about this.
Did you? Okay, good. So it obviously emphasizes the importance of cracking down on small offenses in order to make residents feel safe and to keep it from getting out of control and discouraging more serious crime. So does it work?
We showed some experimental evidence that showed that it worked, but we also talked about the disproportionate impact it had on minorities, and that led to a retraction or moving away from the policy.
Right. So very similar impact on schools, right? It translated into a lot more suspensions for things that had previously not been suspension worthy. Talking back to teachers, a lot of attitudinal stuff, skipping class or being disobedient and disruptive. Can you think about why this might play out differently for kids of color or kids who are disabled? If it's sort of a subjective judgment as to what is inappropriate behavior or how much inappropriate behavior gets you suspended, all the implicit biases that teachers have come into play, right? And some schools, as you heard, interpreted weapon very broadly. So expelling kids for making guns with their fingers, students got expelled for this, or for chewing a Pop-Tart into a gun shape, or bringing a camping fork for Cub Scouts to class. This is, I believe he is 5 or 6, he's a Cub Scout, and he brought a Cub Scout knife, you know, with all the different pieces, the fork, the various eating implements, and he got suspended from school for it. The other thing that happened, as the video talked about, is that schools began hiring school resource officers. How many of you had a school resource officer in your school? Were they police, retired police, do you know? Were they?
Yeah.
Mostly? So a lot of them do go through retraining, which is good if they get retraining, because the school is not like walking the beat, but not everybody does. And sometimes they're just retired police officers. And so when you bring a police officer into the school, even if the intention is to be a support and a resource and to keep order, police officers are used to dealing with crime situations, right? And they're used to arresting people. After Columbine, this went up several degrees. And actually we saw it more recently after the Parkland shootings. There was a real effort by Congress to do what? What was the response to that? Do you remember? This was more recently, obviously. How did they respond? What was the policy recommendation? Arming teachers, right? We were gonna, Justin and I were just thinking that would be really interesting, right? And professors get armed too. And as I mentioned, when you have school resource officers in schools, they, even if they're not meant to impose discipline, even if they're there just for the extreme situation to keep kids safe, teachers will sometimes call on them if you have an unruly student, or they will intervene just because they're there. And so you have a real spike in arrests for really minor things, for misdemeanors, for civil violations. And guess what? Students who are disproportionately impacted by that, and I'm guessing this was one of the things that came out of the broken windows policing, are students of color, and particularly Black students. boys were 3 times as likely to be arrested, black girls 1.5 times as likely to be arrested as white boys. And a lot of that is because of which schools actually have school resource officers. I don't know where all of you went to school, but it's disproportionate that you have police officers in schools that are predominantly schools where kids of color go, right? So, and schools that have high rates of poverty as well. And so when you have a police officer at the school, you're much more likely to have arrests and you're gonna have interventions. And that's why you have, in part, why you have the disproportionate rates. I have to show you this, because it's, have you seen this video of the young woman? Some of you have. Sorry, so,